All right, strap yourselves in for this one, folks, because we're heading down under to Australia for a real head-scratcher. You've brought us this case, a small town called Stawell in Victoria, where Russell Martin vanished back in '77. Poof, just gone.
Ah, small towns, they can be so, well, fascinating, right? Everybody knows your name, sure. But that also means secrets. Those are harder to keep, wouldn't you say? Loyalties run deep, and that makes finding the truth, well, it can be a real challenge.
And that's our mission today, unraveling the truth. We're diving into a true crime podcast, one episode actually, full of firsthand accounts, investigative details, the works, all trying to answer one question. What happened to this Russell Martin? Did he just walk away? Was it some, I don't know, some tragic accident? Or is there something, well, something darker at play here?
Hmm, good questions. But before we get ahead of ourselves and jump into the theories, we should probably understand Stall itself. It's important to get a sense of the place. Imagine, a former gold rush town nestled near the Grampians National Park. Life moves a little slower there. Everyone knows your name, your family history, probably your dog's name too.
Sounds charming, sure, but also like, the kind of place where rumors spread like wildfire. Wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. And those rumors, well, they play a big part in this story. But first, let's meet Russell Martin himself, the man of the hour, or rather, the missing man of the hour. Imagine a guy who'd chop wood for you one day, then, win all your money in a card game that night. He was a woodcutter, just 31,
Yeah.
and a real character from what we hear.
A bit of a local legend then, maybe loved by some, feared by others perhaps. That sounds like it could create some, some interesting dynamics, especially in a town like Stawell.
Oh, you hit the nail on the head there. He loved Stall, deeply connected to the community, but also had, well, a bit of a wild side, let's say. The podcast mentions struggles with drinking, a fondness for gambling, and a temper that could flare up pretty quickly.
So a bit of a complicated character. And his marriage, was that complicated too?
Oh, just as complicated, it seems. He was married to Helen, and, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly a match made in heaven.
What happened? Trouble in paradise.
You could say that. Constant disputes, accusations of infidelity flying back and forth.
Yep.
Their relationship, it was a powder keg. And, well, to add fuel to the fire, Russell's family never quite approved of Helen, you see. Saw her as trouble from day one.
Ah, I see. So tension in the family as well. This is getting complex. And then there's the issue of the Glenorrhea Football Club. Money went missing, right? And suspicion fell on who else, Helen?
Exactly. She was the treasurer.
Yeah.
But she claimed it was Russell who took the money. Which, well, makes you wonder, doesn't it? Was she just trying to shift the blame? Especially considering those gambling debts he had.
Interesting. That certainly introduces a motive. So then let's talk about the night he disappeared. January 18th, 1977. What happened, according to Helen?
According to Helen, he just up and left. Told her he could never return, imagine that.
Just like that. Walked out on his whole life. What about his belongings? Did he take anything with him?
He left some money behind, a new watch. Almost like he, wanted her to sell them and start fresh. He even mentioned a couple of shocks coming her way, which is, incredibly cryptic, right?
Very strange, but hold on a second. Didn't a neighbor claim to have seen Russell sick in bed that same day? If he was too sick to leave the house, how could he have walked away that evening? Something doesn't quite add up here, does it?
You're right, something's off. And to add another layer of mystery, neighbors also reported hearing a gunshot that night. Now we've gone from a man leaving his life behind to, well, something potentially much more sinister.
So a troubled marriage, missing money, a questionable departure, and a possible gunshot. Sounds like the perfect recipe for a town full of rumors.
Oh, you better believe the rumor mill was in overdrive. Some said he ran off with a lover. Others whispered about a psychiatric hospital. There were even murmurs about drug dealing, even a possible connection to organized crime.
Hold on, I remember reading something about a concrete slab. What was that about?
Ah, yes, the concrete slab. That's a detail that sends chills down your spine, doesn't it? One of Russell's friends, a guy named Alan Frame, had a concrete slab hastily installed on his property. And guess when? Right around the time Russell vanished. Now, why the sudden rush to cover up a patch of ground? It fueled all sorts of speculation, to say the least.
Okay, so we have a missing man, a town overflowing with rumors, and a concrete slab that practically screams foul play. So the police were all over this, right? They must have been.
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? But the initial investigation, led by Constable Kennedy, was, well, let's just say it wasn't the most thorough.
Really? What made the constables so suspicious? Was it just a hunch, or did Helen do something to raise his eyebrows?
From what we gather from the podcast, Constable Kennedy uh, simply didn't buy Helen's story. Found her evasive, you see. Her timeline was shaky, and those inconsistencies about the date Russell supposedly left, well, let's just say they didn't exactly inspire confidence.
But wouldn't running away leave his loved ones, his kids, in agony? Was Russell really that callous? It doesn't seem to fit his love for his hometown and his family, at least from what we've heard.
Good point. And, this is where those small town dynamics come into play. It's almost like Stahl itself became a character in the story, closing ranks, protecting its own, even if it meant keeping the truth buried.
Ah, fascinating. So the police hit dead ends, the town clammed up. But someone refused to let this go. Russell's sister, Bev.
Bev, now she's a force of nature, refused to believe her brother was just gone. She hounded the police, wouldn't let up, hired a private investigator when they stalled, and never gave up hope of finding out what really happened to Russell.
Now that's a dedicated sister. It's really something to see that kind of unwavering loyalty, especially when everyone else seems content to just, I don't know, to just let the mystery fade away.
It makes you think, doesn't it? If you vanished, would your town rally around you, or would they believe the worst? Would they search for the truth, or would they just let it go?
That's the question that hangs over this entire case, isn't it? What truly happened to Russell Martin? And can the truth ever come to light, especially in a place like Stahl?
Well, we're about to jump ahead, way ahead, to the year 2002. That's when a coronial inquest was finally held. Imagine, 25 years later, it was like Stahl's secrets were finally put on trial.
And I bet some folks, like Helen, weren't too thrilled about that. But we'll have to dig into all of that, all those juicy details when we come back. So, 25 years later, the town of Stahl was holding its breath as this inquest got underway. A legal deep dive into Russell's disappearance after all that time, after all those whispers and theories.
Right. And it's important to understand what this coroner actually does, especially in Australia. They're like a judge, but they investigate suspicious deaths. They don't, decide guilt or anything like that, but they can make recommendations that lead to criminal charges. So everyone in Stahl knew this inquest was serious business.
Yeah, definitely. And I can only imagine those 25 years didn't exactly make everyone's memories crystal clear, right? It makes you think about, well, how much of what they said was truth, how much was self-preservation, and how much was just, I don't know, plain old forgetting.
Ah, memory. It's a slippery thing, isn't it? Especially with the pressure of a small town where, well, keeping secrets can feel like a matter of survival. And the coroner, they knew this. And let me tell you, their report was scathing, absolutely scathing.
Oh, really? What did the coroner find so suspicious about what people were saying about the testimonies?
Well, for starters, Helen, her new husband Charles, and Peter Ivy, that police officer who was rumored to have had an affair with Helen, they were all deemed, get this, unreliable witnesses, which in layman's terms means we don't believe you.
Wow. So even after a quarter of a century, Helen was still under a cloud of suspicion. It almost makes you wonder, was she relieved when Russell vanished?
The coroners certainly seem to think so. Their report pointed out how quickly Helen sold Russell's things, started a new relationship, and basically acted like nothing had happened,
Yeah.
as if his disappearance was convenient.
But could she have really, pulled off a murder and a cover-up all by herself? And what about the concrete slab? Was she involved in that too?
Now, those are the million-dollar questions, aren't they? It's possible she did it alone, sure.
Right.
But it's also possible she had help, someone who, let's say, shared her motivation for wanting Russell out of the picture.
Like Charles, her new husband, or Peter Ivy.
Maybe. But we also can't forget about those rumors of police involvement, remember? Russell had some run-ins with the law before, and those whispers about a damaged police car being repaired suspiciously. It makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does. It's a chilling thought that someone might have used their power, their authority, to silence Russell, especially in a place where people might be afraid to question those in charge.
Yeah, small towns can have their dark side, that's for sure. But let's not forget about the people who were, caught in the crossfire of all this. Russell's children. They actually testified at the inquest, and their accounts were, they were heartbreaking.
What stood out to you about their testimonies? What struck you?
Well, they were so young when he disappeared, just kids, really. And each one of them dealt with the trauma differently. One son was clinging to the hope that his dad was still alive somewhere, while another seemed, resigned to the fact that he was gone. And the youngest, Paul, had no memories of his father at all.
It's hard to even imagine growing up with that kind of hole in your life, not knowing what happened to your father, constantly wondering, constantly searching. It must have been incredibly difficult to testify, to relive those painful memories after so many years.
It really is. And it speaks volumes about their strength and resilience, that they were able to speak at all. And their testimonies, they revealed something crucial. None of them, not a single one, believed Helen's story.
Wow. So even Russell's own children suspected foul play. What do you think? What did they see or hear or even sense in those days leading up to his disappearance?
Exactly right. They might hold key pieces of the puzzle even if they don't realize it. Which brings us to the coroner's final verdict. Despite the lack of a body and all those conflicting accounts, the coroner concluded that Russell likely died on or around January 20, 1977, and that the circumstances were suspicious.
So officially, it wasn't a missing person case anymore. It was a suspected homicide. But without a body, and with everyone telling different stories, how could anyone be certain? And even if they were, would it even be possible to bring those responsible to justice after all this time?
Those are the questions that will stay with this case and with the town of Stall. Forever, probably. But there's something else, another layer to this story, something that goes beyond the evidence and the facts.
Oh, what's that?
The human element, the impact this case has had on everyone involved.
You're right. You're right. We've been so focused on the who and the how that we haven't really stopped to think about the emotional toll of this mystery, of not knowing, of not having closure.
It's like a ripple effect, isn't it? A stone is thrown into the wire, and those ripples spread out, touching everyone they come across. Russell's disappearance, it created these ripples that spread through his family, his friends, the whole town. And they're still reverberating all these years later.
And at the heart of it all is Bev, still searching, still fighting for justice. It's a reminder that sometimes the truth is worth fighting for, no matter how long it takes, no matter how difficult the journey.
Exactly. Let's delve into that thought when we come back for the final part of this deep dive.
We've spent this deep dive trying to put together this puzzle, the puzzle of Russell Martin's disappearance. And it's a tough one, missing pieces, faded memories, and all these whispers just echoing through the years.
It's a story that really, I think it takes us beyond the typical true crime stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Makes you think about those secrets, those small town secrets, and the weight of unspoken truths,
Mm?
and how it can really shape an entire community.
Yeah, yeah. It makes you wonder what happens when those secrets start to come out, when someone like a coroner, shines a light on the cracks in that facade, the facade that the town has built up over time.
Well, in Stahl's case, the inquest, it didn't exactly answer all the questions, but it did expose those deep fissures that ran through the town. It forced people to confront the possibility that someone they knew, someone they trusted, might have been responsible for Russell's death.
It's like the town itself was on trial, isn't it? Its values, its loyalties, its whole identity. That's a lot for any community to carry.
It really is, especially when the truth, when it threatens to shatter that image, the image they have of themselves, that image of a place where everyone takes care of each other, where justice always wins.
We've talked a lot about the suspects, the theories, but what about Russell himself? Who was he, really, beyond all those rumors and the speculation?
That's the thing about these cases, isn't it? The victim, they can get lost in all the noise, overshadowed by the search for answers. But Russell, he was a real person, a man with flaws, sure, but also virtues, with dreams, with regrets. He had people who loved him, and maybe people who feared him too.
And those people, those who were close to him, his family and friends, they're the ones left behind to deal with all this. The ambiguity, the not knowing, all those unanswered questions, they linger like ghosts.
Especially his children. They didn't just lose their father, they lost their childhoods to this mystery. It shaped everything for them, their perceptions, their relationships, their whole sense of who they are.
It's like they inherited this legacy, a legacy of suspicion, of not trusting anyone. Like the world is just this dangerous, unpredictable place.
And yet, even with all that pain and uncertainty, there's Bev, Russell's sister.
Yeah.
She's like this beacon of hope, this testament to the power of love, of loyalty.
She just refused to let go of her brother, refused to let the truth be buried under all that time and silence. She kept searching, kept asking questions, kept pushing, even when everyone else had given up.
Bev's dedication, it's a powerful reminder that sometimes the fight for justice, it's a lonely one. It's a long road, and there's no guarantee you'll reach the end. But Even when you don't find all the answers, the act of searching, of just bearing witness, of not giving up, that can be its own reward.
It really can. And that brings us back to you, our listener. You brought us this case, all these sources, these whispers from a small town so far away. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what what sticks with you? What do you keep coming back to?
Well, it's a case that leaves you with more questions than answers, that's for sure. But maybe that's the point. Maybe it's not about finding a neat and tidy ending, but about understanding how complex it all is. About the ambiguity, the gray areas, because
Yeah.
that's what real life is like. Every human story has those gray areas.
That's a good point. Maybe it's about, well, about realizing that even in these small towns and seemingly ordinary lives, there are depths we can't even fathom, secrets waiting to be discovered, and truths that, well, that might just stay hidden forever.
And maybe, just maybe, that's what keeps us coming back to these unsolved mysteries. They make us think critically,
Mhm.
to challenge what we believe, to question everything, and to accept that, well, that uncertainty is just part of the human experience.
Well said. Well, as we close the book on this deep dive into Russell Martin's disappearance, we'll leave you with this. Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep searching for the truth, even in the most unexpected places. Because sometimes the journey, the search itself, that's the real destination.